Hello, I'm Gary Kent. In February 2021, we recorded 9 video courses that are available from GeoLearn on various aspects of the 2021 ALTA NSPS standards, which came into effect in the same month. This is a video created from the highlights of my What's Changed course. I hope you find this informative and useful to help you adjust your work to meet the new standards. The first thing that changed in the standards, other than just minor little references, for example, they would refer to 2016 standards and now they refer to 2021. The first thing really that changed was in section 2. And this covers the request for the survey. It talks about written authorization, which really the best form of that is a written contract, and we would certainly highly recommend that. It also addresses the occasion where you might be asked to do a survey on a property that is not a typical type of property. Additionally, we talk about non-fee types of interest. So I would get a lot of questions on this. Is it okay to do a land title survey on, for example, an easement or a lease? And the answer is yes, it is perfectly acceptable to do that. The problem with a lease is they probably don't have a good description for it, so we may have to prepare one. The issue with an easement is kind of odd. Maybe there's an existing hotel and they've already had a land title survey on it, and it would be advantageous for them to have access to a different street. Maybe they're fronting on one street, but they could acquire an easement off a neighbor to get access directly to another street. And so they approach that neighbor and they come to agreement and they decide they're going to acquire this easement for maybe a substantial amount of money. Well, they don't need a survey of the hotel. They only need a survey of that easement because they will get a title insurance on that easement. And the key point on these issues of these types of properties is to talk with the interested parties. This would be the title company, the lender, and the client or the buyer. Talk with them about what they're expecting and what they need with regard to these types of properties. In section 3, there are a number of minor changes, and there is a very significant change. In section 3E, Romanes 1, this is where we define relative positional precision, right? This is the measurement standard portion of the standards. And we made a couple of changes to this item that will make it, number one, a little bit easier to apply, and number two, makes it a more defensible standard, which is very important from the surveyor's standpoint. Now it's the relationship of the monument or witness marking any corner of the surveyed property to the monument or witness marking an immediately adjacent corner of the surveyed property. So on that same four-sided figure, we only now have 4 relationships. The diagonals don't count, they're not necessary. Now, we know that in the past, and we have stuck with this, that we can estimate the relative positional precision by the results of a correctly weighted least squares adjustment. That's not been changed, that's true. But in order to frame this whole thing better and create a better standard, we created another option on this. And this is, what this does is it frames the whole measurement standard, the relative positional precision, in the context of a term called local accuracy. And this is something that I had concern with for a long time, which was when we're talking about the relationship, it's kind of like relative to what, right? The relationship of this corner to this corner relative to what? And what we've done is we've said we're only talking about that relationship. It's not relative to some datum or some bigger thing, right? And that's where the term local accuracy comes in. This is a relatively new term in the geodetic world, but it frames this a little bit better. And then we provided an option, which is a good option, not that anyone's going to do it, but it nails down our definition better by saying that you could also estimate the results of your relative positional precision by using the full covariance matrix of the coordinate inverse between those adjacent points. Okay, on to section 4. Section 4 deals with the records research. What we've done is, if you were to look at the red line marked up version of the 2016 standards that resulted in the 2021 standards, almost the entire section 4 is red. Looks like everything's changed, but actually hardly anything changed. We just rearranged things. So now we have a concise set of requirements, rather than how it was before, which was kind of confusing as to what the surveyor was to be provided. It now says the surveyor must be provided with certain things. And the first thing listed are the record description of the property being surveyed, or the property to be surveyed, or the record description, if it's an original survey, the record description of the parent tract that includes the subject property. The third thing that needs to be provided is that there are certain record documents, and the standard actually defines public records here. These are recorded documents, and there are 3 parts to this. First are the deeds for the adjoiners. Second are the easements that benefit the surveyed property. Now, these will normally be listed in Schedule A of the title commitment. These are the insured easements. And the third item are the easements that burden the property, and these will be the easements listed in Schedule B2 of the title commitment. The unrecorded documents that someone may want the survey to make reference to. Can we do that? Yes, you can absolutely show proposed easements, for example, or even proposed improvements on a land title survey with just two thoughts. Number one, make it patently clear what's existing and what's proposed. Right? An existing easement will have the recording information and that sort of thing. A proposed easement, it needs to be clearly indicated that it's not an existing easement. And the second thing is, I would make sure that if it's proposed, where did that information come from? Who provided it to me? What's the document entitled? What day did I get it? And that's just going to protect you, the surveyor, if you're doing that. And that's just in 5C Romanesque 2. One thing we did is we struck the word natural off of vegetation. That was put in 2016. That word caused a little bit of confusion, and it was really kind of unnecessary. So the word natural has been stricken. The other thing we did is we talked about evidence of occupation or evidence of possession. And to be consistent throughout the standards, we normally talk about possession and occupation, and we inadvertently did not include the term and occupation. So there's no magic to that. We just inadvertently didn't include that in 2016, so that has been added. The last thing that we did in 5C Romanesque 2 is we make reference to Section 5E Romanesque 4, because in 5C3, we talk about locating observed evidence of features within 5 feet of the boundary. And then it says, in 2021, it says, see Section 5E4 relating to utility poles. The committees decided that utility locate markings, which would normally be flags or paint or maybe chalk, depending on the situation, that those are evidence of utilities, which means because Section 5E4 In 2016, we pulled in all observed evidence of utilities on the property as a mandatory item. So paint marks, and the reason we did that is because those are also evidence of easements. So when you look at section 5E, Romanesque 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the 2021 standards, you'll see reference to utility locate markings because the committees felt that is valid evidence of a utility, which means it's also potentially valid evidence of an easement. So you're going to see that. Now, there was concern over this because we don't always know where did those marks come from. And so the committee said, show that information as evidence of an easement or utility with a note as to the source of that information. And if you don't know the source of the information, then in your notes say that we don't know where it came from. Now, there have been some questions raised as to whether this means that we have to request, for example, an 811 locate on a land title survey. And the answer is no. Section 5E does not say that. It merely says that if there are utility locate markings out there, those are and should be treated as evidence of utilities. The other thing that is a change in section 5E4 in particular is that we require, and in section 5C Romanesque 3, we talk about features within 5 feet of the boundary of the property. And this is, no, there's no change there. That's been that way for several versions. But in that section, 5C Romanesque 3, we also say, however, when it comes to utility poles, you need to refer to section 5E Romanesque 4. And what 5E4 says is that we need utilities within 5 feet of the boundaries, just like everything else, unless it's a utility pole, in which case, if it is within 10 feet of the boundary, in other words, off the property, if it's on the property, any utility features on the property we need to show. Utility features within 5 feet we need to show unless it's a utility pole, in which case we need to show if it's within 10 feet. 6B1, there is a change, and that is that the requirement used to be that we needed to show the record description of the surveyed property. If it's a retracement, that's always been a requirement. But it also said we need to show the record description of the parent tract. So what we have now said is we just need the record document number, the recording information for the parent tract. We don't need the actual description. The first is that we have decided, because lenders sometimes are kind of hung up on whether an easement affects a property or not, we decided to try and work with that. Now, the standards have always been focused on fact-based, objective information, so that when we certify that we did a survey pursuant to the standards, there's no conjecture, there's no subjective things. We can say we did this survey pursuant to the standards. I was always concerned about the word affects, because we can think of effects in two ways. One is, if it's on the property, then it affects the property, correct? Well, not if it's not a valid easement, it doesn't. If the easement was granted by someone who didn't even own the property, that easement might plot on top of the property, but it doesn't affect it because it's not a valid easement. So I always shied away and told surveyors to be careful using the word affects, because there is a legal connotation to that. And yet there are lenders who still wanted surveyors to give opinions as to whether the easement affected the property. So what we've done is we have framed the use, and we actually encouraged. We always had focused on, does the easement plot on or across the property? That's fact-based, right? Lenders want to know if it affects the property. So we frame the use of the word affects by casting it in light of where does it plot according to its description. So we have encouraged, or it suggested, go ahead and say it affects, it doesn't affect the property, but let's focus on where it plots. On to section 6C and a new Romanesque 8. This is a new item, and it addresses something that's been a concern for a long, long time. I've had a lot of questions on it. When I do programs on the standards, I talk about this issue all the time. And what it is it's how surveyors treat easements that they believe exist but that are not listed in the title commitment. So what this item says is we need to let the title company know it's there. If they can't show it's been released, then we need to show it or explain it and then add a note that says the title company has been made aware of this. In Table A, there are a number of changes to Table A. And the changes start with the introductory comments, the introductory sentences before you even get into the table. One of the interesting things that happened while we were working on the 2021 standards was that I came to the realization that many surveyors did not realize that the actual wording of a Table A item can be negotiated. Everybody understood that whether or not the item was selected, that's negotiable. Everybody understood that the fee for that item, that was negotiable, but they did not understand that you could actually negotiate the wording of an item. So for 2021, we said if set forth in a zoning report or zoning letter specific to the property to be surveyed, if that is provided to the surveyor, then we will list those items, the zoning classification, the setback requirements, the height and floor space area restrictions, and the parking requirements. The second Table A, item 6, is 6B, and this is another option, and it's the same issue. Now, this item is when they want us to actually draw the setback line on the face of the survey, right? Graphically depict the setback requirements. So we're going to draw the setback line on there. Again, it's the same issue we addressed in section 6A. Rather than us having to interpret the ordinance, they're going to dump things in our lap. No, they need to provide us the zoning setback requirements that are specific to that property. And assuming that I do not have to interpret what those mean, then we will be able to draw those graphically on the face of the survey. And it says evidence of underground utilities existing on or serving the property as determined by. And now we have two choices again. And by the way, it also says, in addition to, in this sentence here, in addition to the observed evidence which was required pursuant to section 5E4. So we're trying to say, if that's all you want, you don't need to request anything here because we've already provided that information, right? So beyond that, we now have two choices. One is plans and or reports. So utility plans or utility report provided by the client. That's an option. They can check that off and the surveyor's response is, okay, where's the plans? You need to provide those to me. The second item recognizes the fact that in most parts of the country, making an 811 utility locate request for a survey is simply an exercise in frustration because you're probably not going to get a timely response. You're probably going to get an incomplete response at best. And so we eliminated as an option 811 utility locate requests. Now I understand in some parts of the country you can get a response, in which case you could modify this item here and say, we'll do an 811 locate request. It's actually effective in our area. In most parts of the country, it's not effective. And so the second item is markings coordinated by the surveyor pursuant to a private utility locate request. We do mention 811 locate requests in that note. But what we say is they may be ignored or result in an incomplete response. So I think that this, if you are requested under Table A, Item 11, I would take that note and put it in your scope of work, and I would also put it on the face of the plat or map when you're all done, because utilities are a high liability item. And one reason is because people check it and think we are going to provide complete, accurate, and reliable information, and we know that that's not going to happen. What used to be item 18 was a wetlands item. That came in 2011. It was a problem. We tweaked it in 2016. It continued to be a problem. We debated on how to tweak it again, and the ALTA members of the committee said, you know, this has nothing to do with title. Why don't we just, instead of trying to come up with better wording, let's just get rid of it. So that's what we did. If you check this item off, we're going to treat that off-site easement just the way we treat the other stuff. We're gonna do everything that's required in Section 5 in the field. We're gonna draw it up pursuant to Section 6. We're gonna include all of the Table A items that were picked on the survey, except monumentation, because we're not monumenting that item. Please check out all 9 courses on the new standards from GeoLearn. These include the What's Changed course. This one is especially helpful for those who do the field work and the office work regularly for ALTA NSPS surveys. There's also an overview course for managers and others not directly involved in producing ALTA NSPS surveys, but who still need some knowledge, as well as 7 courses detailing the changes. Look for the information that follows for valuable discounts. If this video and the GeoLearn courses don't answer all your questions, feel free to contact me. And thanks for watching.